Hello, everyone, and welcome to TOEFL Masterclass Advanced Strategies for High Scores. And we are here today with Danijela Jovanovic, who is an expert TOEFL teacher. She comes to us from Vancouver, Canada, where she works for Kaplan International. She is also the owner of Professional ESL Test Prep, where she offers services in editing and writing feedback, and of course, TOEFL preparation. Danijela, we're so excited to have you today. How are you?
Well, hi, great. Under the circumstances, I suppose.
Yes, there is
interesting times.
Very, very, very much interesting times. There's a lot going on. So this could be a great time for studying. So I'm hoping that students take this opportunity. I know I am taking the opportunity to, read more and study more myself. So I think this webinar comes at a really great time, hopefully for students. And before we get to your lesson, Danijela, I would love to ask you a few questions about your TOEFL experience. And the first one being, just tell us a little bit about how you started teaching international students.
Okay, so it's been a while. I can remember exactly. I'm a trained English teacher. I trained to be an English teacher back in my home country, Serbia. That was a while ago. And when I came to Canada in '94, I didn't really or wasn't able to work as a teacher then for various reasons, mostly because I needed to verify my credentials. And that at the time it required, excuse me, a couple more years of training and few tens of thousands of dollars for upgrading those skills. So I sort of decided to go a different route and worked in various admin positions for a few years until I finally decided to go back to my original calling. And that was in about 2002, where I went through the TOEFL, whatever you want to call it these days, certification. And soon after that, started working for language schools here in Vancouver. There's been a few language schools in my last many years of teaching. Kaplan being the one of the last two. So I'm actually currently working at both Kaplan and at another vocational college, the ESL department there. And it's very interesting and fulfilling because these give me a chance to work with different students, while Kaplan has mostly younger international students who come to Vancouver on their study vacation and keep me young. The other school is mostly for the immigrants, for mature professionals who are waiting for their PR and so on and so forth, and are preparing to enter the workforce here or continue their studies. So it's not specifically test preparation, it's not specifically academic English, it's more of the basic general English that helps them become Canadians. So I guess I digress, but basically that's how I started back in about 2002, started teaching at language schools, and that's what I've been doing until a couple years ago, where I had to expand for various reasons.
Wonderful. And how long have you been teaching the TOEFL test specifically?
So I sort of got in at the ground floor, as they would say, with a TOEFL PBT. I started teaching TOEFL when it was just transitioning from PBT to CBT. And so as I was getting used to CBT, it went IBT. So it was really at the very beginning that I joined the TOEFL teachers force. And so it's been 16 years or so, right? No, sort of 14. The IBT started officially in 2006, right, in North America. So yeah, I started teaching that right away.
Wow, that's amazing to have that many years of knowledge for the test, because as we know, it does kind of ebb and flow and introduce new things, and sometimes the things in the past, like, they come back somehow. So it's wonderful to have that knowledge base that you do of that long period of time, really studying how this test works. What do you think are the most important things that students should keep in mind on the day they take the test?
I actually like to tell students what to do before the day, or what not to do rather, before the day they take the test. It's impossible to avoid anxiety on the test day, but there are things that people should do before, the day before, or again, things they shouldn't do. So nobody learns anything the last day before the test. And usually I advise my students to just drop everything, put away their TOEFL books, and go do whatever makes them happy, relaxes them, relieves their stress. So if it's walking, sports, dancing, reading, watching movies, getting together with friends, anything other than thinking about TOEFL. And of course, very good night's sleep, breakfast if they can, if they have time, and it's just a normal human thing to do.
Yes. Yeah, it's so important to be as relaxed as you can be, and certainly staying up all night the night before, studying vocabulary, it's not going to be helpful to you at all. In fact, it could work the opposite way. So I think that's really great advice. What advice would you give for the student who's just beginning their TOEFL preparation? Maybe they have a test in 3 months or 6 months from now, and they're just starting their preparation, and it can be really confusing with all these choices out there, or what to do, how to study. What advice would you give to that student?
So here's where I will actually refer the students or people who are watching to one of the blogs. I did feel the need to write about this a couple of years back. And so basically the advice is go to the source. There's no better way to start or a better place to start than the ETS website. It just provides the most credible information there is. And so I always refer my students to the ETS website. And again, starting there, they can figure out if they, how much they can do by themselves, where they can find other resources, and if they need help and what they need help with. Everybody has to decide for themselves. Everybody comes to TOEFL preparation with a different level of underlying skills, and sometimes they have to go, some of them have to go back quite a bit, make sure their vocabulary is strong, their grammar is strong, because that makes it a lot easier down the road to actually focus on TOEFL strategies and practice.
Yes, wonderful advice. And in all your career, your 16 years of working with TOEFL students and helping them to achieve their goals, what has been maybe the best success story that you have seen, that you have experienced with one of your students?
I guess it would have to be one of my first online students, because I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of students in class. But once they started transitioning online, one of the first students I worked with was without giving out the names, a pharmacist, of course, from Poland, who had taken the TOEFL test, I believe, more than 10 times. and was at a point where he just didn't know what to do. And all he needed was a little boost of confidence, because his speaking was actually really good. He was a little anxious, and that showed every time he spoke. So once he got over that, he got his 27, I believe, and that was the end of that for him. So,
yeah. Yay. Yeah, that is awesome. I mean, 10 times taking the TOEFL, and I admire our students so much because they are so persistent and just keep staying the course. And when you do that, when you stay the course and you keep showing up, you will see results eventually, but it can seem really sad in the beginning if you keep taking the test and don't get your results, but never give up, because there are so many stories like the one you just told out there. Danijela, what are you offering TOEFL students right now in terms of your TOEFL preparation services?
So I guess we'll include a link to my website after the our interview. There's always there are always the services that are standard, private lessons, some of the, as you mentioned earlier, editing and proofing, which is not necessarily only related to TOEFL, but there is a TOEFL essay evaluation, collection, feedback as a separate service. Although sometimes that becomes part of the private lessons, again, depending on what the individual students need. One of the things, though, that has been around for a while for me, and it had to evolve a little lately, is the independent speaking workshop, which is a small group workshop that right now goes on Saturdays, 10 o'clock Pacific time, and it's just a chance for students to practice with a bunch of independent speaking questions in a small group where, because of the size of the group, it usually becomes a very sort of cozy, intimate setting once the students get to meet each other and see each other and realize they're all in the same boat, right? So sometimes they give each other feedback. I'm always there to correct, to time, to give feedback, ask them if they all want to try the same question or if they want to just keep going. That's it's a wonderful way to. This actually came out of a game we used to play in class when I was teaching at a school. There was every time we came to the independent speaking, everybody was so anxious about sitting in front of the computer and speaking to a computer. People just don't feel very comfortable about it. So to make it a little bit more humane, I sort of designed this little board game where we would just sit around a desk, a table, and literally roll the dice and then go over the board with a bunch of questions. We also had a little question cards where students would have the 15 seconds for preparation and 45 seconds to answer. And that was a big hit. In my TOEFL classes, everybody was looking forward to this day when we did independent speaking because they knew that the game was coming. And other than that was the only moderately fun part of the TOEFL class, because as we all know, TOEFL's not fun. So when I started teaching online, I thought there has to be a way to somehow incorporate that sort of practice into online teaching, and that's how the workshop was born. So
wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, for me, it has to be fun. I mean, I try to make as much fun as I can because it's also for me, I want to have a good time too while I'm, engaging with this material. And I know how stressful it can be, especially when we're trying to reach that score and you're under this pressure. So any way we can kind of bring the fun element in, I think is brilliant and really useful. So Danijela, I know you have a lesson planned for us for this webinar. Tell us a little bit about what you want to teach.
So the lesson that that I'm going to present is related to independent speaking. And because I've done these workshops for a long time and I've had a lot of students go through a lot of questions too, I've seen certain patterns emerge. And what I wanted to focus on in my lesson was time management, which still and always is a huge problem. Content, in terms of how to organize the content of your independent answer. That always, I mean, it seems easy enough. Students tend to follow the templates, you know, the good old opening statement and the two supports, which works fine for most answers. But what happens within those supports sometimes is not exactly what they think it should be. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to address too. So basically, yeah, the time management and some of the content organization.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to your lesson. Thank you so much for being here. And stay tuned for Danijela on independent speaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you again. Hello again, TOEFL takers. As I promised earlier, we're going to take a look at some of the issues related to the independent speaking, question 1, and specifically related to the content and time management. These two issues have been the most common ones that I've noticed with the many students that have come through my independent speaking workshop and the TOEFL preparation classes that I've been teaching at various schools for a number of years. So let's look specifically at what I mean by content and time management. When it comes to the content, again related to question 1 only, here are some of the most common issues that always come up. First and foremost, and this is almost every student I've ever worked with, lack of ideas. Most students come to the workshops or to classes saying that they just have no idea what to say, especially because of the time pressure. They wouldn't even know how to answer a lot of questions in their own first language, let alone in a foreign language. So that usually is the first and the biggest obstacle in answering, obviously, this question. So this is the first issue we'll be looking at. So to deal with the lack of ideas, the only thing you can really do is to sort of live and breathe the independent question. When I say that, I mean, don't limit yourself to only a couple hours or however many minutes you decide to devote to TOEFL preparation on a daily basis. Try to train yourself to think about everything and anything in your daily life as if it were a TOEFL question. So to show you what I mean by that, we're going to take an example. Excuse me. An example that relates to our current situation. So imagine this was an actual TOEFL question. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? This is a great time to focus on your TOEFL preparation. Use details and examples in your response. By this being the great time to focus on TOEFL preparation, I mean this now time where we are mostly limited to our homes, isolating because of the current state of pandemic. So I'm sure this is on everybody's mind. And again, might as well try to package your answer or your opinion on this in a format of an answer to question 1. So this is sort of an outline of a potential answer. If I were to think about this answer, I might say something like this. I do believe that this is a good time to focus on TOEFL preparation for a couple of reasons. First of all, these days we have a lot more time at home because we don't have to go to work or school, and because of that we also don't spend a lot of time commuting. So just by staying at home, we actually save a lot of time that can now be devoted to TOEFL preparation. Another reason I think this is a good time to focus on TOEFL preparation is that we actually have great access to online resources these days. There is plenty of videos, PDFs, ebooks, webinars, video lessons that are all geared towards TOEFL preparation. So there's no need, again, to waste time on going to libraries and searching for books or going to specifically scheduled classes. I didn't plan this to be an actual sample answer, so I didn't time it. The idea was to show you that, again, just your everyday thinking should be hopefully put in a format of a TOEFL answer. In terms of how many sentences you have time to say, or how many sentences your answer will be, that's another question that I really don't have a good answer to. This is what a lot of students ask. They want to know the formula. They almost want to know it down to a letter. How many sentences should I say? Well, that's really not something that is a universal formula. And actually, we'll address that a little bit later when we talk about time management. Let's go back to the content. So another issue with content is misunderstanding the question. There are questions that are misinterpreted easily. And actually, even the clear questions can be easily misinterpreted when you're doing the test because of that test anxiety and that pressure you're under. Again, there's not a lot you can do, but there is a little bit of a tactic you can apply here, which is a really simple thing. When you are presented, when the question is presented, instead of sitting there and listening to the speaker say the question, which causes a lot of anxiety, additional anxiety in a lot of students, try not to even listen to the speaker. Try to read, actually read the question for yourself. A lot of times when you are reading and trying to understand what you're reading, you actually do get it better than when you hear a question. Because sometimes if you're just listening, there might be a word that's not familiar, that you don't know the correct pronunciation of. And if you don't understand it because of the pronunciation, you're just not going to know what they're asking. So chances are that when you see the words in writing, you will understand better what the question is. So I'm going to give you an example of a question that has caused a lot of misunderstanding in the past. It's a slightly, older TOEFL question that goes like this. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Young people today are too materialistic. Use details and examples in your response. So looks like a typical question, right? Agree, disagree question. But this statement is actually also fairly straightforward. Are young people today too materialistic or not? However, you wouldn't believe how many of my students have misinterpreted this question. My guess is that this is, it triggers some sort of response where a lot of people feel like they have to sort of defend the young generation and explain why young people have to be materialistic. So typically the answers I get to this question are something like this. I think young people today are materialistic because of the following reason. Everything is so expensive, so to survive in today's world, we have to be materialistic. Also, most young people want to be like their friends. They don't want to be different. And if all of our friends are have brand clothing and expensive devices, then we want to be like them, and so on and so on. So basically, this is not really answering the question. The question is simply asking you whether you agree or disagree. Do you think that young people today are materialistic, or not? So there's no reason to justify. You just state whether you think yes or no and why. That's your answer. So the correct answer should be more like this. Again, an example, and only an outline, not the actual sample answer. I think young people today are not materialistic because I know many examples of young people that do not care about things like brand clothing or expensive newest types of phones and so on and so on. They prefer to be comfortable and to have the devices that let them do what they need to do, but are not just very expensive because of the brand name. Also, young people today, especially the ones I work with, and this is true, I'm finding that a lot of young people today are very, very generous in terms of sharing the information, sharing the resources. I see a lot of groups of young people around the same, the common interests, where they get together and very generously share any information they have with others. That's probably, again, gone over 45 seconds, but once again, it's not supposed to be an actual sample answer. It is more of a sort of a guideline of how this answer, generally speaking, should be answered. The question should be answered. Okay, moving on. We are going to be looking at the third common issue with content, and that is organization. What I mean by organization of your answer, well, most of us follow and like to see or hear as teachers the good old format that includes the opening statement, support 1, support 2. This is not to say that every single question, independent question, needs to be answered like that. Yes, sometimes there are variations. Sometimes you can have only one really good support with a lot of details and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's going to be a little story that's going to illustrate your opinion. So again, this is not the only way to answer the question, but it is the most common and sort of most dependable format of your answer. So let's assume you're going to follow this, this format. The opening statement is that first sentence, which is actually pretty much a direct answer to the question. Okay, so let's just, oops, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay. So again, we'll illustrate this using another typical question. Here we go. So some people prefer to live in an urban area. Others would rather live in a rural setting. Which of these two options do you prefer and why? Again, typical choice question, and we're going to take a look at two possible outlines. Both of them are possibly correct answers, so there's no correct choice here. You can choose living in urban area or rural setting, in other words, in a city or in a country. And this is what living, the first choice potentially would sound like. I prefer to live in a city, in an urban area, because there are, for a few reasons. First of all, there are usually better career options in the city. There are a lot more higher education institutions, and usually people who come out of these, graduate from universities in the big cities, have more choices when it comes to finding a job. Another reason I prefer living in a city is because of the variety of cultural events and institutions they often offer, such as art galleries, theaters, and so on and so forth. So once again, opening statement clearly makes a choice, and then the first support, which, by the way, I would explain as this is where actually a lot of confusion also comes in. People tend to think of supports as details, or actually to confuse details and supports. Probably the easiest way to tell the two apart would be by thinking of your supports as sort of reasons, like a major all-encompassing reason, sort of like you have here. One of the reasons I prefer living in a city is the career options. And then the details used to support that, the specific examples. So again, think of the details as more of the specific examples, illustrations, and so on. So the details illustrating that support are higher education opportunities, jobs, and so on. So let's take a look at the other option. So for somebody who prefers to live in the country, in a rural area, the answer might look something like this. I prefer to live in the country because of the following reasons. So my first support is going to be, usually when you live in a country, you have greater access to nature. So my support here is nature, which is a fairly broad concept. And that gives you a lot of opportunity to give some specific examples. So what do I mean by nature? Well, when I say nature, I mean there's access to fresh air. People who live in a country spend a lot more time working out in the open, so they're constantly in the fresh air. Also, They can produce food for themselves, and that would be another detail illustrating that access to nature. Another support, I think it's better to live in the country, is that in my experience, there is actually a lot stronger sense of community among people who live in the country, in smaller communities. That's usually because everybody knows there are fewer people, and everybody knows one another, and people in smaller communities usually tend to care a lot more and pay attention to their neighbors' needs and try and help. Which kind of feels like these days anywhere you go, because we're right now not communicating that much, unless online, of course, with people outside of our immediate surroundings. So I think you know what I'm saying here. Okay. So once again, when it comes to the problems with the content, there are three common issues. The first one is lack of ideas, which can be helped by trying to consistently think of anything you're thinking about anywhere, out on the street, in a shower, in the kitchen, when you're making your meals, in terms of being in a situation where you have to give your opinion in 45 seconds and organize it the way you organize these questions, these answers. The second problem, the second potential issue, not understanding or misinterpreting the question, again, is addressed by, partially at least, by reading the question yourself rather than just listening to what the speaker says. And the third, organization of your answer. Again, my recommendation is to follow the format as often as possible, as often as that sounds like the best answer possible. And to also make sure that you understand the difference between, excuse me, between supports, between reasons you are choosing an option, for example, and those specific examples that are used to illustrate and make that choice or reason clear. Okay, the next bigger issue that we're going to talk about is, time management. And again, when it comes to time management, there are a couple common issues. There are two extremes, actually. Sometimes you don't really have a lot to say, so you kind of answer the question, but that still leaves you with a few seconds of dead air. And I know that a lot of, and this is actually quite a reasonable solution. When that happens, what you want to do is try to give a sort of a conclusion. Nothing new if you don't have any new ideas anyway. At least you can try and summarize what you already said. That might fill a few seconds. Excuse me. The other extreme would be actually having a lot to say, having so much to say that you constantly are getting cut off. And I've seen a lot of those cases too. This, out of the two, this is definitely a better problem to have, because especially if you're cut off in the middle of your last specific example, your illustrations, you have already answered the question, you've had your opening statement, you made your choice, and then you gave one full support with the details. You gave another support, another reason, and now you're listing your details, and this is where you get cut off. That's not really a problem at all. That just signals that you actually are thinking about this a lot and you do have a lot to say. So I wouldn't really worry about that. Okay. Now, there are ways to improve your time management for answer one. And this is actually going back to what I mentioned earlier, the formula. The formula in terms of how many sentences should I include in my answer to fill 45 seconds. I know you don't want to hear this, but really there is no formula for the simple reason that every test taker speaks at a different pace and uses different sentences. Some people speak in very short sentences, so logically they will actually have to say more sentences to fill the 45-second time limit, while some people actually tend to use very long and complex sentences, which doesn't really give them a lot of, or the time is limited, again, 45 seconds, so you can't really say that much if you are using very long sentences. Ideally, you do want to use a mix. You want to use some very short, simple sentences, and you want to use more complex sentences, because that's where you can show off your language use, your grammar and sentence structure, vocabulary, and all those nice aspects of your language use. So how do you figure out how much you can say in 45 seconds? Well, this is something you can do by yourself. It does involve a little bit of repeated recording and analyzing, but it is possible. It is, again, it's something that a student can do for herself or himself. It doesn't necessarily require teacher supervision or assistance. So what do? Again, going back to the good old format, given that you have 45 seconds, you don't want your opening statement to be longer than about 10 seconds. Again, ideally 5 to 10 seconds. That would leave you with 40 seconds or 35 seconds for the two supports and some details. And again, you will adjust that accordingly to about 15 to 20 seconds per support. So what you want to do is take one question and record multiple answers to that question, aiming at having a variety, again, of sentences of different length, maybe even changing the speed a little. Some questions or some answers might be a little bit slower, some a little bit faster. The point is you want to have a few recordings so you can compare them and find out for yourself what works best for you. And this is really important. What works best for you is going to be an individual thing. No two test takers are going to speak at the exact same pace. Not even the same test taker is always going to give all answers at the exact same pace. Sometimes you will have more to say about certain topics, other times you will have less. And so how do you deal with that? Well, you have to practice. You obviously have to practice a lot. You have to answer a lot of practice questions. And over time, it will become a little bit of almost an automatic thing for you to, whenever you're discussing something, thinking about an issue, you sort of start organizing in your head, at least, your answers the way you organize the answers to question one. Now, everything I've said so far is more or less something that you can do by yourself. If you follow these tips, you can improve the content. You will have more ideas the more you think about things, and again, the more you try and put it in this sort of answer format. If you read every question, you will have a chance of understanding the questions better and less possibility of misinterpreting the questions. And again, with practice also comes the clear understanding of what would qualify as a support, as a reason, and what would be more of a detail or example or illustration. So also what I mean by this is that you can also change or improve time management if you follow this advice, and then again try and record those answers and analyze the recordings yourself. You will come up with a bit of a clear pattern of how much you can say, how many sentences, and at which pace, and so on. All that being said, obviously there are things that cannot be improved by yourself, and this is where the teachers, obviously, the tutors come in. Yes, you can practice in a group with other students. That will help to a certain point, but you also have to remember that other students, however good they are still not native speakers. Not that that is absolutely necessary, but simply they also have their own language problems, and sometimes cannot recognize your problems and tell you how to fix them. This is especially true for the groups of students, study groups, where most students are from the same language group. If you are trying to practice with, let's say, everybody in your group is, I don't know, Korean, you will all have similar problems, and you won't even know when somebody is making a mistake because you are making the exact same mistakes. So it's really helpful if you are going to study with other students. It's really helpful to have a mix, to have students from different language backgrounds in the same group. That gives you a bigger chance of sort of recognizing some mistakes that are typically not made in your language group, but easily recognizable when somebody from another language group makes them. And of course, the best advice would be to, when you get to the point when, and this is what happens a lot with students who have to get a really high speaking score, the famous 26 in speaking. A lot of people plateau at 23, 24, 25, and that final little push is really hard to make by yourself. This is where teachers come in, and I'm honestly going to say it's better to spend a little bit of money on a workshop, on a class, on a couple lessons with a tutor, with a professional TOEFL teacher, instructor, tutor, than to keep taking the test and paying enormous amounts of money only to always be 1 or 2 points short. So speaking of the help you can get with me, feel free to visit the website being Professional ESL Test Prep. Here's the link at the bottom of the page, and I'm actually going to show you the homepage in a moment and how to actually go directly to the independent speaking workshop sign-up page, and some more information also. So bear with me while I leave the screen here. And let me see if that works. Okay, just to make sure that this is actually, that I'm sharing the page I want to share. I'm going to switch here, and here we go. Okay, so when you go to, again, the link is here, proesltestprepaultogether.com. You will see our recognizable homepage. On our homepage, that looks like that. If you are looking for information about speaking, specifically about the independent speaking workshop, which, by the way, goes on every Saturday now, 10 o'clock Pacific time, which is California, west coast of, excuse me, North America time. You can simply go to, or, well, there are actually, no, sorry. You can go to appointments. That's the fastest way to get there. So once you click on appointments, you will see independent speaking workshop. And when you click there, it will take you directly to the sign up page where you can here schedule the appointment, just follow the procedure. Another way to register is by just scrolling down a little on the home page till you get to, till you get to the blog, which is hard to miss. You can here start reading the blog, and when you go to read more, it's going to take you to the full blog. And once again, here are a few links, including this title here. But if you want to read through it all, at the bottom again, you will find schedule the appointment time. And from here, you can actually go directly to the appointment page, which at the moment shows you that the next independent speaking workshop available, or that there's still a few spots available on the 25th. Okay. And just gonna stay here. So yes, I would welcome questions, comments. Feel free to, again, go to our website and leave your comments at the end of the blog here, or we can always be found on the on Facebook under, again, Professional ESL Test Prep, our business page, as well as you can even through the website link to my LinkedIn profile and get a hold of me there if you want to. So I'm hoping to have a chance to help you a little bit more with your independent speaking. Stay well, stay safe. I'm hoping this is all gonna be over very soon. And good luck with your TOEFL test. Take care.